So in 2016, Nadia Eghbal released this, Roads and Bridges, the Unseen Labor of Our Digital Infrastructure. This is a 142-page report from the Ford Foundation, and it shines a light on the woeful state of many critical open source software projects and the unfortunate situations of some of the people who maintain it. Now, prior to Nadia's report, very few people outside of the immediate free and open source software communities, few people knew how poor of a state some open source projects were, how few people maintain the software that is the foundation of a large amount of the internet and the services that run on it. However, after her report, a lot of the software industry was now very suddenly aware of the dire situation faced by many open source projects. Many of them, their companies were built upon. Most of these people were very shocked. But this was, of course, because these were people and companies who had been using open source but not participating in the communities. Had they participated in the communities, they would have already known the situation of free and open source software because the communities had been talking about it for a long time. However, Nadia's report called attention to it to everyone. Now, these people who were suddenly very shocked to learn what was going on with free and open source software, that there were very few maintainers for some projects, and that some projects did not have the resources required to be sustainable. Now, these people, being software people, being in the software industry, they did what software people know how to do very well. They started building software to collect money. There has been a flood of newly launched initiatives and endeavors directed towards getting money to open source project maintainers. The ones you see on the screen are just a few of the endeavors that have been launched for this purpose, getting money to maintainers. That is all they really do. Most of these are VC funded. They have venture capitalists giving them money because the VC think they can get money from it. But there are some nonprofits out here. For instance, Mozilla is a nonprofit. LiberaPay is a nonprofit. But most of these are VC funded. And those were just a few of them, and there are more on the way. Because of what I do for a living, I have people come to me and ask for advice on their new open source initiatives. And I have people speak to me about, hey, would this new idea help for funding free and open source software? And some of those ideas are very bleeding edge. They're very, very new and unique. And they are not stable themselves. And some of the ideas are really quite bizarre and are not going to go anywhere. Now, all of these initiatives focus on money, and this is despite the report's very, very clear focus on a multifaceted approach to infrastructure maintenance. But people in our industry, for people in software, unfortunately, sustainable seems to equate completely to funded. You're only sustainable if you have money. So funding is naturally where they focus. As is very often the case, it feels like the software industry is reinventing the wheel, rather than investigating how other businesses, how other initiatives, how other industries have already solved this problem. Now, if the software industry wishes to address the problem of sustainability, then it has to look elsewhere for guidance, because other industries have already looked at this. And where it should start looking is here, corporate sustainability planning, specifically with this publication. This publication is titled Our Common Future, the World Commission on Environment and Development. That's its title, and you can buy this book. It's from Oxford Press. But it is better known by this name, and this is the one that everyone will use for it, the Brundtland Report. Now, the Brundtland Report was published by the United Nations in 1987. So that is many decades ago. People have been talking about this and came up with a plan. And it was published after many years of international discussions about the environment and corporate development. Now, what the report discovered is that it is impossible to talk about growing an economy without also talking about sustaining the environment within which that economy is growing. It therefore focuses on environmental conservation and the corporate responsibilities for human sustainability and how these things are critical for corporate success. Now, the report defines sustainability as development that meets the needs of the present, of today, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It recognized the need for a balance between economy and ecology. It found that these three elements are key for meeting the goals of sustainable corporate development: poverty reduction, wealth distribution, and gender equality. And it found these and published about it in 1987. That's how long ago they knew about these things and how they were critical for corporate and economical growth. Furthermore, each one of these are inseparable from the others. They are interlocking crises. Each one is a component of the larger crisis. So as a company, it is not possible to focus on just one of these elements, to focus on just wealth redistribution, or to focus on just gender equality. Each one of these three elements must be addressed simultaneously if there is to be any positive effect. None of them are optional. The Brundtland Report has led to the corporate sustainability planning movement. There has been a lot of research into this, a lot of work by corporations and by universities, and a lot of corporations have corporate sustainability plans. The MIT Sloan School of Business has done a lot of work on this, and you can read a summary at this URL. So you can learn all about corporate sustainability planning here and find resources, other resources. It's an excellent article. So as I mentioned before, there are many elements to corporate sustainability, and they all must be addressed simultaneously. You cannot ignore any of them. These are both internal to your company, such as looking at your natural resource usage. Are you using sustainable energy? Are you recycling? That sort of good stuff. Does your company have a diversity and inclusion program? Is it trying to bring in people who don't look exactly alike, people who don't think exactly alike? Does it treat its employees fairly? These are all things that happen internally to your company. But there are also external things that your company must do for a corporate sustainability plan. It must look at its entire supply chain. Are the people who are providing your services, who are providing your materials, are they also acting sustainably? Because if they are not, then neither is your company. And then the overall impact your company has on the environment and on the inhabitants of the earth. Now, if you look at this list, what you will notice is that none of these involve simply paying money. They all involve a lot of work, a lot of communication. It's not just throwing money at the problem. As you can probably imagine, coming up with all of these things and implementing a plan that covers all of those elements of corporate sustainability, it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time. So why do companies do it? Why would they invest so much in a corporate sustainability plan? Is it just because taking care of the earth and its inhabitants is the right thing to do? Well, yes, it is, but that's not the only reason. It turns out, studies show corporate sustainability plans are very, very profitable. If you are able to implement one correctly, then your company will make more money. It's not just good for the planet, it's good for your stockholders as well. And here are some of the benefits that companies with strong corporate sustainability plans find from implementing them. You do have a more reliable supply chain because it is no longer reacting to the environment in a negative way. You get increased collaboration within your company because you are treating people better and you have a better culture, but also externally. And that improved communication leads to more innovation, which allows your company to out-innovate its competitors. You also have happier employees, so they stay longer, and it is less expensive to hire because people want to join your company. You have a very good reputation. It can save your company millions and millions of dollars to have a corporate sustainability plan. So that's why people do it, not because it's the right thing to do, but because you can make a lot of money. So why do I mention this in a talk about open source sustainability? Well, rather than reinventing the wheel and approaching the subject of sustainability from scratch, free and open source software should follow the open source way, as all open source projects do, and it should build upon the work contributed by others. In this case, it can build upon the work of the corporate sustainability planning movement and the Brundtland Report, which came out in 1987, and most people in software don't know about it. Now, as with corporate sustainability, open source sustainability requires a focus on much, much more than simply money. I am all for paying maintainers, absolutely. But paying them alone, just doing that, is not going to provide the support that free and open source software needs for a long life and for continued success. And just with corporate sustainability, there are these interlocking crises. Each one of them is a component of the overall open source sustainability crisis. And just as with corporate sustainability, you cannot focus on just one of them, for instance, money, and expect things to just work. So here are those interlocking crises. Here are the elements of open source sustainability. Contributing back, human and environmental diversity, and community safety. All of these must be addressed simultaneously. They are intertwined, they are braided together, they are not separable. They must be addressed by all people and all organizations that want to work toward a more sustainable, free and open source software environment. So I will go through these in more detail. Starting with contributing back to the projects on which your company relies. Companies that use free and open source software but don't contribute back or support the projects that they use, those companies undermine and degrade the long life and success of free and open source software. So your company should give back to these projects. But what does giving back look like? Well, it depends on what the project needs. It could be money, but odds are very good that's not the case. And more importantly, a lot of free and open source software projects are not set up to accept money. That requires infrastructure that they do not have. So if you simply want to throw money at the problem, the project won't be able to spend it. So you have to do research into the project to see what it actually needs. Does it need contributions for code, for marketing, for testing, for infrastructure, for events? There are so many different ways to contribute to open source software that is not simply throwing money at the problem. Now, I have managed maintainers of vital pieces of free and open source software infrastructure. I used to lead software engineering departments. Now I am director of open source strategy for Juniper Networks, so I don't lead teams anymore. I lead the corporation. But when I did lead teams, I managed people who were working on critical pieces of open source infrastructure. The company we worked for paid them full time to work on this open source infrastructure. That's all they did, was work on open source. Because they reported to me, I know exactly how much money they made. I also know how much time they were spending on these open source projects. These people did not need more money. I would gladly have paid them more. They did excellent work. But they did not need more money. What they needed was help. Because even before they came to the company, they were spending 60, 80, 100 hours a week working on these open source software projects. They did not need money. They needed contributors. They needed assistance. And all we hear about now for open source software is please pay the maintainers. That is too simple. It is not that easy. The second element in open source sustainability is human and environmental diversity. Contributing back helps this because more people are participating in the project if you are contributing back. And for the sake of free and open source software, getting more and more people involved not only provides more resources to do the work, but it also provides more innovation, more ideas, and those lead to more sustainability. There is a growing body of research that shows that diverse teams consistently outperform teams that are all made up of the same type of people. In software, that typically means all men, and all men from a certain background. But if you add people from other backgrounds, if you add people from other races, other genders, what research shows is that team does better every single time. So it's very important for free and open source software that we do this as well. Diversity, though, does not simply mean gender or race or background. It also means geographic and language diversity, which is something that we are experiencing here. Because I do not speak a single word of Chinese, and many of you do not speak a single word of English. But we are all interested in free and open source software. This is a global experience. It is used all over the world, but most projects are only available in a single language, the language of the primary maintainer. And that usually is English, but not always. So participation and contribution from people in other countries helps to open the door to the other people in that countries. And that can lead to millions more people who are able to use and contribute to free and open source software. The more geographically diverse a community is, it also means there are more people available in more time zones to fix problems when they come up, to answer questions when they come up. And that can really help the project as well. But there's also more than simply the human side of open source for diversity. A lot of companies go out of their way to use free and open source software because it means they do not get vendor lock-in, which means that you get software from a vendor and then you cannot leave that vendor ever. But if you use an open source solution, you can go and use another vendor from that open source solution. It's very good for business. But what we are seeing more and more of is in open source software is a type of vendor lock-in. We are seeing monoculture, where free and open source software is becoming consolidated in very small number of organizations, a small number of tools. And that makes these organizations and tools single points of failure. So if something happens, for instance, for GitHub, a lot of open source software development screeches to a halt. That is not healthy for open source. I love GitHub. I use it myself. I want it to be very successful. And I want it to have a lot of competitors who are also supporting open source software, because this is more healthy for open source. And for me, as someone who directs a company to use open source, it is very good for my company to know that the open source we rely on can be available from multiple places, not simply one. So the third element of open source sustainability is community safety. It is not possible to build a diverse contributor base where people do not feel safe. As an open source participant, your company is in the position to witness unprofessional and unwelcoming behavior and to speak out against it. Belittling comments, personally directed criticisms, sexualized language or imagery or behaviors, bigoted, racist, sexist, or hateful language. All of these things make people feel unwelcome and drive them away from open source software. And this is not good for free and open source. It does not allow free and open source to grow in the way it needs to support your company. Actions such as these undermine the trust required to create a psychologically safe environment that is necessary for a thriving open source project and community. This article from the Harvard Business Review talks all about the positive business effects of having a psychologically safe environment. If you're good to people, if you treat them well and make them feel safe, your company thrives and makes more money. It's been studied, and here is the research. So one way your company can help to ensure community safety is to restrict its contributions only to those projects that both have a code of conduct and empathetically enforce it. This is an example of a code of conduct. This is the Contributor Covenant. It is used by many, many free and open source software projects, and it is a very good example of a code of conduct. Having a code of conduct in your repository is one thing. That's just having a file in your repo, right? But enforcing it is what really matters, and not enforcing it like a big jerk face. Right? You have to be empathetic to the people because often they are simply making mistakes rather than intentionally being mean. So before your company contributes to an open source project, don't simply check whether it has a code of conduct in place, but also ask the project about its enforcement policies and procedures. So these are the three elements of open source sustainability. What will your company do to work on them? How can your company help? What is your company's open source sustainability plan going to look like? It depends. There is no one right way to do it, and that is because every company has unique needs. Every company has different free and open source software projects that are strategically important to it. And each of those projects have their own unique needs that will allow them to be successful and have a long life. So to get started, we do have some steps here. Figure out what projects are strategically important, talk to the projects to see what they need, and then give it to them. Now, that seems relatively simple, but each one of these is actually very involved and takes a lot of time and effort. I will go into them very briefly. First, figure out which projects are important to your company. If you're going to have an open source sustainability plan, you can't simply support every single open source project that your company uses. It's too much. I can guarantee you are probably using hundreds or thousands of projects. And you can't do that. It does not scale as we say in software. So take the time to understand your open source software supply chain. Which links in that chain, which links of those chains, which open source projects are the most vital to your company? They don't have to be very large. They just have to be important to your company or potentially very difficult to replace. The things that your software that runs your company simply cannot rely without. Next, talk to those projects. Once you've identified them, go to the community and learn what they need. Learn what your company could do to help ensure the success and longevity. Again, that could be many different things. Could be testing or programming or documentation or administration or project management or design or infrastructure or security or simply, yes, paying for some things. It could be money, but it might not be. So don't assume you know. Go to the community and ask, because they know better than you what they need. Don't force support on them simply because it's easy for you. Do what's good for them, and that will make them sustainable and have a long life. And third, actually follow through. Once your company has determined how best to contribute to and support the projects, then you start implementing a plan. But as with a corporate sustainability plan, an open source sustainability plan is something that requires a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of commitment. It cannot be rushed. You cannot take shortcuts. You cannot address only one of the elements. Your plan must encompass them all. Remember, you are trying to ensure the long life of a project. That means you must take the long view as well and invest the time required to get the job done right. It also means your company cannot simply copy the plan of some other company. Well, we shall do it this way because Google does it that way. I am sorry, that will not work. Because your company is unique. Google is unique. Juniper Networks is unique. We all have unique needs for our companies. So take the time to figure out what those needs are. And if you put in that time, if you put in that work, it is worth it. You will get benefits from implementing a successful free and open source software sustainability plan. More reliable supply chain, collaboration, communication, innovation, employee retention and recruiting. It is no coincidence that these are exactly the same benefits you get from a corporate sustainability plan. The bottom line is that putting in the work to ensure that the projects, the open source projects that make up your company's open source supply chain, making sure they have long and healthy lives, it is very, very good for business. Ignoring the issue of open source software or simply throwing money at the problem is not good for business. Thank you. I am VM Brasseur. I am Director of Open Source Strategy for Juniper Networks. I am the author of this, the first and only book on how to contribute to free and open source software. You can find me here at Twitter. These slides are already available at this URL on Internet Archive. So you can go and download them now. And you can get the book here. Thank you to the Open Source Summit team for having me. Thank you to our wonderful translators for all of their work. And thank you all for being here. We have 5 minutes for questions. Any questions? Yes? I actually do not take comments. I only accept questions. So if you would like to have a conversation with me afterward, I am open for the rest of the day.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So I'm very glad to speak with you afterward. Are there any questions about what I have given you? Okay, then we are done. Thank you very much for being here.